July 2003, the world watched as the most feared sons of Saddam Hussein, Uday and Qusay, were hunted down and killed in Mosul. But their deaths were only part of the story. Within days, graphic images were released, and leaked footage from inside the morgue shocked the whole world. Before their deaths, Uday and Qusay Hussein were two boys growing up inside one of the most feared regimes on earth. Uday was born on June 18, 1964 in Baghdad. Qusay Hussein followed on May 17, 1966. At the time, their father was still building his power inside Iraq's ruling Ba'ath Party. Saddam had already taken part in the 1968 coup that brought the Ba'ath Party fully to power. But he was not president yet. He worked behind the scenes, controlling security and intelligence. By July 16, 1979, he pushed aside Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr and officially became president of Iraq. Within days, he held a meeting where top party members were accused of betrayal, arrested, and later executed. That moment showed exactly how he planned to rule. From that moment on, the Hussein family was feared. The boys grew up inside guarded compounds and presidential palaces in Baghdad and Tikrit. Armed guards were always nearby. Intelligence officers surrounded their lives. They saw power up close. They saw how loyalty was rewarded and how enemies disappeared. In Saddam's Iraq, fear was a tool of control. People who opposed the regime could end up in prisons. Torture was not a secret. It was part of the system. Uday, the older brother, stood out early. He was loud, aggressive, and unpredictable. He liked fast cars, expensive suits, and attention. People who worked around him later described him as violent even in his teenage years. Qusay was the opposite. He rarely spoke in public. He stayed calm. He listened more than he talked. But quiet did not mean weak. He was watching, learning how power actually worked behind closed doors. When the Iran-Iraq War began in September 1980, everything intensified. The war lasted 8 years and cost hundreds of thousands of lives. Iraq's economy was stretched thin. Soldiers were dying at the front. Saddam needed complete control at home. Family loyalty became even more important. During this time, Uday began stepping into public roles. He later took control of the Iraqi Olympic Committee and the Iraq Football Association. On paper, it looked like a sports job. In reality, it became another tool of fear. Athletes who lost games were reportedly beaten, humiliated, or locked up. Some were held at detention sites linked to places like the Al-Radwaniyah complex near Baghdad. Sports were no longer just games. They became another way to show who was in charge. While Uday grabbed attention, Qusay moved inside the security world. He avoided flashy positions. Instead, he built influence within elite military units. By the late 1980s, he was deeply involved with the Republican Guard, Saddam's most trusted military force. He later gained authority inside the Special Security Organization, the unit responsible for protecting Saddam personally and monitoring threats from within Iraq's own leadership. But then came 1990 and 1991. Iraq invaded Kuwait in August 1990. The United States formed a coalition of more than 30 countries. The Gulf War began in January 1991 and ended in February after a massive air and ground campaign. Iraqi forces were pushed out of Kuwait quickly. For the first time, Saddam's rule looked fragile. Inside Iraq, uprisings broke out. In the south, Shia groups rose up in cities like Basra and Najaf. In the north, Kurdish forces took control of several areas. The regime responded with force. Tanks rolled into southern cities. Helicopter gunships were used. Entire neighborhoods were shelled. Thousands were killed. Qusay played a central role during this period. As part of the security leadership, he helped coordinate efforts to crush the rebellions. After the Gulf War, Iraq faced heavy United Nations sanctions. Oil exports were restricted. Infrastructure damaged by bombing could not easily be repaired. Electricity failed often. Clean water became harder to access. Hospitals struggled without medicine. Reports from the 1990s estimated that hundreds of thousands of Iraqi children were affected by malnutrition and disease. Ordinary families waited in long food lines. But inside presidential compounds, life looked different. The ruling circle still had access to wealth, protection, and luxury. Uday's behavior became more extreme during this time. Years earlier, in October 1988, he had murdered Kamel Khana Gigio, Saddam's personal valet, at a party in Baghdad. Gigio had introduced Saddam to a woman who later became his second wife, Samira Shabandar. Uday reportedly attacked Gigio with a club and beat him to death in front of guests. The killing shocked even members of Saddam's inner circle. Saddam briefly sent Uday to prison, and later to Switzerland for what was described as medical treatment. But the punishment didn't last long. Family ties outweighed justice. Through the 1990s, Uday expanded his control over media. He owned the newspaper Babil and oversaw television and radio stations that promoted the regime's image. He shaped propaganda, attacked critics, and presented himself as a powerful figure. In 1995, he formed the Fedayeen Saddam, a paramilitary group loyal directly to him. The group became known for strict loyalty to Saddam and for violent enforcement of regime policies. They were visible in black uniforms and often operated outside traditional military command structures. In 1996, Uday suffered an assassination attempt in Baghdad. Gunmen ambushed his car. He was shot multiple times and seriously injured. He later walked with a limp and relied on a cane. After that attack, many observers believed he became even more suspicious and aggressive. Trust narrowed. Revenge became part of his mindset. While Uday's public image grew louder, Qusay strengthened his quiet authority. He was methodical. He focused on preventing coups and monitoring internal threats. Senior military commanders understood that Qusay's approval mattered. In October 2000, Saddam officially named Qusay Deputy Commander of the Armed Forces. That decision sent a clear message inside Iraq's political system that Qusay was being prepared as the successor. Uday did not receive the same signal. The rivalry between the brothers deepened. Uday still held influence, but Qusay held structure. And in a regime built on control, structure mattered more. Then the international situation shifted again. After the September 11, 2001 attacks in the United States, Washington's focus turned sharply toward the Middle East. President George W. Bush accused Saddam's government of possessing weapons of mass destruction and violating United Nations resolutions. Throughout 2002, tensions rose. Inspectors returned to Iraq. Military preparations increased. On March 20, 2003, the U.S.-led invasion of Iraq began. Airstrikes targeted Baghdad and other major cities. Coalition ground forces moved quickly from Kuwait into southern Iraq. Within weeks, Iraqi defenses collapsed. On April 9, 2003, Baghdad fell. The statue of Saddam in Firdos Square was pulled down in front of cameras from around the world. Saddam disappeared into hiding soon after. So did Uday and Qusay. The U.S. military launched one of the largest manhunts in modern history. To make it simple for soldiers on the ground, they created a deck of 55 playing cards featuring the most wanted members of the former regime. Saddam was the ace of spades. Uday was the ace of hearts. Qusay was the ace of clubs. Every soldier knew those faces. American intelligence believed the brothers were moving between safe houses, protected by loyal tribal networks, especially around Tikrit and northern cities like Mosul. Mosul, Iraq's third largest city, sat near key roads leading towards Syria. It was chaotic in those months. Former regime loyalists, tribal fighters, and foreign militants were all trying to reorganize. For U.S. commanders, capturing or killing Saddam's sons became a priority because they believed the two brothers could help organize resistance. Behind the scenes, U.S. forces offered a reward of up to $30 million for information leading to Saddam's capture and $15 million each for Uday and Qusay. Money talks, especially in a country where the economy had collapsed under sanctions and war. In July 2003, that pressure paid off. On July 22nd, A local informant in Mosul contacted U.S. forces with specific information about a house where the brothers were staying. The house belonged to Nawaf al-Zaidan, a wealthy businessman with tribal connections. Later reports said that al-Zaidan turned them in after realizing who his guests really were and fearing the consequences. The exact motivations are still debated, but the information was detailed enough for U.S. commanders to act quickly. The operation was carried out by the 101st Airborne Division of the U.S. Army, led by Major General David Petraeus. Around 200 soldiers were involved. Special Operations Forces supported them. Bradley fighting vehicles and Humvees sealed off the area. Helicopters hovered overhead. Snipers took positions. The goal at first was capture, not destruction. Inside the two-story house were Uday Hussein, Qusay Hussein, Qusay's 14-year-old son Mustafa, and a bodyguard named Abdul Samad. They had weapons and had prepared defensive positions. Around 10 a.m., U.S. forces surrounded the building and called on the men inside to surrender. Instead of coming out, gunfire erupted from inside the house. Automatic weapons fire hit American troops almost immediately. What followed was a fierce firefight that lasted about 6 hours. Soldiers returned fire with machine guns and grenade launchers. At one point, U.S. troops tried to enter the house but were pushed back by heavy resistance. The men inside were well armed and knew they were cornered. As the battle dragged on, U.S. commanders decided to escalate. They brought in TOW anti-tank missiles fired from a Bradley vehicle. Rockets slammed into the building. Parts of the upper floor caught fire. Walls collapsed. The house was torn apart, piece by piece. By midday, the resistance stopped. U.S. soldiers moved in carefully through the rubble. Inside, they found all 4 men dead. Uday had been shot multiple times. Qusay was found nearby. Mustafa, only 14 years old, had also been killed in the fighting. Abdul Samad's body was found inside as well. The intense gun battle left heavy damage throughout the structure. Uday was 39 years old, and Qusay was 37. The U.S. military quickly worked to confirm the identities. Facial recognition was used, dental records were compared. DNA samples were tested against known family members. Within 24 hours, officials publicly confirmed that the 2 sons of Saddam Hussein were dead. For American commanders, it was a major victory. Removing both brothers at once dealt a heavy psychological blow to former regime loyalists. But inside Iraq, many people did not believe it. For decades, Saddam's regime had controlled information tightly. State television lied openly. Fake stories were common. So when American officials said the 2 most feared sons in Iraq were gone, suspicion spread fast. Rumors moved through Baghdad, Mosul, Tikrit, and Basra within hours. Some said the brothers had escaped through tunnels. Others claimed the Americans killed lookalikes. In Saddam's rule, body doubles were sometimes used for security, especially for public appearances. That history made doubt stronger. In a country shaped by propaganda, people needed proof they could see with their own eyes. Inside Washington and Baghdad, U.S. officials debated what to do. Releasing images of dead bodies is not a small decision. There were concerns about Islamic burial traditions, which emphasized respect for the dead. There were also fears that graphic images could inflame anger instead of calming it. But military leaders argued that without hard proof, resistance fighters would continue claiming the brothers were alive and organizing attacks in their name. On July 24, 2003, just 2 days after the battle, the Pentagon released photographs of Uday and Qusay's bodies. The faces had been cleaned and partly reconstructed by mortuary specialists to make them recognizable. Even so, damage from bullets and explosions was visible. The images were shown during a press briefing in Baghdad and then broadcast worldwide. The goal was just to prove they were dead, destroy the myth, break the idea that Saddam's inner circle was still intact. At that time, U.S. forces were already facing roadside bombs and ambushes. Intelligence officers believed some fighters were waiting for orders from surviving regime leaders. Showing the bodies was meant to crush that hope. Satellite television did the rest. Channels across the Middle East replayed the photos repeatedly. In some Iraqi neighborhoods, people gathered around televisions in shops to stare at the images. In parts of Baghdad and southern Iraq, small celebrations broke out. Families who had suffered under the regime saw it as justice. In other areas, especially around Tikrit, anger and silence replaced celebration. Human rights groups quickly criticized the decision. Organizations such as Amnesty International questioned whether showing the bodies publicly respected basic human dignity. Some U.S. officials privately worried that it set a precedent. From a military point of view, though, there was an immediate impact. U.S. commanders reported a temporary drop in attacks in certain regions during the days that followed. The psychological effect was real. Two powerful symbols of fear were gone. Still, serious questions remained. The firefight had lasted 6 hours. Heavy weapons, including TOW anti-tank missiles, were used against a residential house. Critics asked whether such force was necessary. Others focused on the death of 14-year-old Mustafa. Even as that debate continued, something more sensitive began circulating. After the official photographs, additional video started to appear. This footage showed close-up scenes of the bodies inside a medical facility. The brothers' faces were visible from different angles. Medical staff could be seen cleaning wounds and preparing the bodies. The damage from the firefight was clearer than in the official still images. The video was not part of the original Pentagon release. U.S. officials stated that only specific photographs had been approved for publication. They denied deliberately leaking any further material. But in a war zone filled with cameras, translators, contractors, and local workers, information rarely stays contained. The footage began airing on major Arab satellite channels. In 2003, social media did not exist the way it does now, but satellite television had an enormous reach. Millions of homes across the Middle East could see the same images at the same time. The video spread quickly beyond Iraq into Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and the Gulf states. In the days that followed, the bodies of Uday and Qusay were handed over to relatives. They were eventually buried in their hometown of Tikrit, near family graves. Security was tight during the burial to prevent unrest. By then, Saddam himself was still missing. For U.S. commanders, as long as he was free, he could inspire loyalists and fuel the growing insurgency. Intelligence teams focused heavily on tribal networks around Tikrit, Saddam's hometown area, especially villages along the Tigris River. By late 2003, U.S. forces were gathering more detailed information from captured former officials and local informants. The operation to find Saddam was given the name Operation Red Dawn. It was carried out by the 4th Infantry Division, working with Special Operations Forces. The mission took place near the town of Ad-Daur, about 15 kilometers south of Tikrit. On the night of December 13, 2003, U.S. soldiers raided 2 sites that were codenamed Wolverine 1 and Wolverine 2. At one of those locations, they discovered a small concealed underground space, later described worldwide as a spider hole. It was a narrow bunker dug into the ground, covered with bricks and dirt, with a small ventilation pipe sticking out. Inside that cramped space, Saddam was hiding. He did not fire a shot. When U.S. soldiers pulled him out, he looked tired and disoriented. He reportedly had a pistol with him, but did not use it. The capture happened without a firefight. Medical personnel examined him on the spot. His identity was confirmed quickly. The psychological damage from losing Uday and Qusay months before had clearly weakened his inner circle. Many loyal commanders were either dead, captured, or had switched sides. His security network, once controlled tightly through the Special Security Organization and Republican Guard under Qusay, had collapsed. In 2005, Saddam stood trial before the Iraqi Special Tribunal, later renamed the Iraqi High Tribunal. The court charged him with crimes against humanity, including the killing of 148 Shia men and boys from the town of Dujail in 1982. After a long and highly publicized trial, he was found guilty. On December 30th, 2006, he was executed by hanging. On the other hand, Uday and Qusay never saw a courtroom. They never faced formal charges. Their story ended in that damaged house in Mosul. But the calm after their deaths did not last. By late 2003 and into 2004, insurgent attacks began rising again. Roadside bombs, sniper attacks, and suicide bombings became more common. One of the most dangerous groups to emerge during this period was Al-Qaeda in Iraq, led by Abu Musab al-Zarqawi. Zarqawi, a Jordanian militant, used sectarian violence to fuel chaos. Car bombs targeted Shia neighborhoods. Attacks on U.S. forces increased. Iraq was moving toward years of brutal conflict that would peak between 2006 and 2007. The removal of Saddam's sons left a power vacuum. Former soldiers, intelligence officers, tribal fighters, and foreign militants competed to fill the gap. The Iraqi state structure had collapsed too quickly, and rebuilding it proved far more complicated than removing its leaders. The leaked footage and the released photographs of Uday and Qusay became part of a larger global debate. Military officials defended the decision, saying proof was necessary. Human rights organizations argued that displaying the dead crossed ethical lines. Media experts later studied the moment as an example of psychological warfare in the modern age. Either way, those images marked the violent end of a dynasty that had ruled Iraq since 1979.